especially delighted to start today off by kind of celebrating the partnership that we've been building with Cardiff University. A couple of the genetic counselling students have been doing a kind of placement with us, as it were, for their dissertation. And the first of those is Helen Campbell, and she's going to tell us the research that she's doing and how she'd like you to take part in it during today and the coming year. So please welcome Helen.
Hi everyone. Hello, can you hear me sort of okay? Yes. It's lovely to meet you all. Really nice to be here. I've been looking forward to the conference for a while, so yeah, hopefully it'll be a really good day. As James said, I'm going to be talking a bit about a research project that I'm going to be doing over the next year about aniridia and the experiences of those with aniridia, and hopefully by the time I've kind of finished talking, some of you might be interested in getting involved, so please do let me know if you would like to. So, just an outline of what I'm going to talk about today. So, first I'm going to say a bit about me, then I'm going to talk about the research topic and the aims of the study. Then I'm going to talk about current evidence and why the study is needed, what the research will involve, and then we'll finish up with a discussion and kind of open the floor to any questions as well. So, I'm Helen, and as James said, I am an MSc student at Cardiff University, and I'm in my third year doing a course in genetic and genomic counselling. So I'm doing that approximately 2 days a week. About 3 days a week, I have recently started as an eye care liaison officer in Chester, or an ECLO. I'm sure many of you are familiar with what an ECLO does, but it's essentially being in an eye clinic and helping people with sort of emotional support, referrals to kind of practical and information support and that kind of thing for people who've recently received an eye diagnosis. And a big part of the role is also helping people with the process of registering a certificate of visual impairment as well. So as I say, I recently started that, but previous to that I've had about 8-year career in research and impact measurement in charities. So I'm going to talk about the research topic now, and the reason I'm up here today is because about 18 months ago I got in touch with Katie, one of the Aniridia Network trustees, to talk to her about doing some research with the Aniridia Network. She said that one of the areas of interest for the trustees was to look at the varied experiences of those with sporadic aniridia that sort of arises for the first time in an individual, and those with a sort of familial aniridia, so those for whom a family member already has aniridia. And they were interested to look at the experiences of those two groups of people and see whether there was sort of any differences in their experience and the psychosocial impact of the condition and how it plays out for them. And another area of interest was looking at the impact of people experiencing further sight loss in adulthood. And these areas seemed kind of really important to look into and also very aligned with my research interests. So together we came up with a research question, which is what I will be looking at over the next few months. So I'm going to read out the specific question now, and then I'll kind of break it down a bit, because as with lots of academic things, it's a little bit wordy. I'm personally sort of contesting with that on a day-to-day basis. So the question itself is comparing the psychosocial impact of further sight loss in adulthood between people with sporadic and familial cases of aniridia. So firstly, comparing the psychosocial impact. Psychosocial relates to basically anything to do with emotions, quality of life, experiences, employment, relationships, social life. So it's really things that aren't to do with the clinical experience of someone's eye condition. So that's quite broad, really. Further sight loss in adulthood, so specifically looking at the experiences of those who've already had some degree of sight loss or were born with some degree of sight loss. And then again, between people with sporadic and familial cases of aniridia, and really trying to kind of tease out any similarities that might exist, any differences, and looking at those things. So, leading on from that question, there are 4 kind of distinctive aims of the research, which are to explore the psychosocial impact of further vision loss and the anticipation of this in adulthood for people with aniridia, how having a family member with aniridia or not contributes to participants' experiences of aniridia, the role of family relationships in shaping identity, and finally, what, if any, differences in support needs exist for people with familial and sporadic aniridia. So I thought it might be useful to maybe talk a little bit about what we know so far in terms of published evidence on this question. So I'm going to go through a few slides about what we know at the moment about this area. There's a bit of a caveat here, which is that these are some kind of initial impressions of the literature. I'm going to be doing a much more thorough literature review as part of my dissertation, but yeah, just some kind of initial findings really when you have a look at this question. So firstly, thinking about research into the psychosocial impact of sight loss, there's a substantial amount of evidence out there about this at the moment. Most of it relates to age-related sight loss conditions like age-related macular degeneration, but there are some studies that show that there are some impacts on self-esteem, emotions like anger or anxiety, and some depressive symptoms as well, and also kind of thinking about social isolation. So that's broadly could be useful research, but as I said, it's mostly to do with age-related sight loss conditions. So there are quite a lot of what we call confounding factors there. So many of these impacts might be more related to experiencing older age and becoming more isolated or other aspects of that rather than the sight loss itself. So helpful, but there are some limitations within this evidence. Next, what's out there at the moment in terms of the psychosocial impact of aniridia. So there's very little published evidence out there at the moment, except there are some case studies in a book by Nerby and Otis, the Aniridia and Wagger Syndrome, A Guide for Patients and Families book, which sort of takes a US perspective into Aniridia and Wagger Syndrome. And there's a chapter in that book which has 19 autobiographical case studies from people with aniridia who are talking about various aspects of their lives and their experiences. And again, it's really good at bringing insights from those people and providing a really sort of deeply personal reflection about their experience. But in terms of kind of applying it to my research, there's some limitations with it, relying on an experience from the USA. And it's kind of looking at aniridia as a whole rather than sort of zooming in on the impact of further sight loss. So yeah, useful, but again, some limitations to applying on it. There are also some studies that have been done by Galina Janning, or possibly Jelena Janning. I'm not sure about the pronunciation of that, but she has done some questionnaires looking at the psychosocial impact of aniridia, which have found that, again, there are some sort of emotions around anxiety and frustration, self-doubt that can be reported in those with aniridia. But because they were very sort of structured multiple choice questionnaires, there wasn't a huge amount of opportunity to go fully fleshed into the deeper emotional experience behind these. So a broader remit than this study, but there are some useful themes that are identified. Apart from that, it's quite difficult to find any other research that specifically looks at aniridia, although there is some information out there about overall psychosocial impact of genetic eye conditions. So there are a lot of studies that look at other genetic eye conditions such as albinism, Usher syndrome or retinitis pigmentosa, and a review from 2020 summarised some of the findings from these studies essentially, and summarised them into a number of different areas and themes. So again, very useful research, but there is sort of limited application to my research question because a lot of these conditions also have an impact on sort of other areas of life, such as dual sensory loss or altered pigmentation of the skin. So there are some kind of complexities in trying to generalise findings from those studies to the experiences of those with aniridia. And then finally, looking at the evidence that compare studies between the experiences of those with sporadic aniridia and familial aniridia, I've struggled to identify any studies which really look specifically at this. And as you can imagine, it could potentially be a very sort of interesting area for sort of any genetic condition, really. So yeah, there's a fair amount of gaps in published research that highlight this question or kind of help me to answer it at the moment. So going on to what the research will be used for, the really big one here is to help inform how Aniridia Network can best support its members, to see whether there are kind of different support needs or what they can do to provide that further support if necessary or not. And it's also going to be useful to give a greater insight into the experiences of different groups of people with aniridia and inform provision of support by clinical genetics services as well. As I'm studying to be a genetic counsellor, that's one thing that's really at the forefront of a lot of genetic counsellors' minds about how we can best do referrals or provide support to people in that sense. So, I talked a lot about the question and what it's going to be used for, but what's it actually going to involve? Essentially, it's going to be a recorded interview, either online through Zoom or similar, or through the telephone with me for up to 1 hour. And I'll be recording that, and then I'll be going away and transcribing it and pulling out different themes from that and kind of writing up the research from there. So it'll be about 1 hour of your time. In advance of that, you'll have to read the participant information sheet and sign the consent form, which is going to be an accessible online form, or I could do it over the phone as well if that's preferable. And the interview itself is going to be completely anonymised for the purposes of the research and confidential, and the data will all be dealt with in a very compliant way, which will all be detailed on the participant information sheet. But let me know if you'd like any more information on that. And if anyone is interested, then I'd really like to have a chat today, essentially. So I'll be here all day. So please sort of come up and have a chat with me. And yeah, we're still sort of finalising everything with the recruitment process, but I'll definitely be taking names and emails of anyone who's interested. So to sum up, we're really trying to get a deeper understanding of the experiences of those with aniridia out there and known a bit more. One of the kind of outputs of the research is obviously my dissertation. I'll also be writing a blog and a more executive summary for the Aniridia Network website, and I'll hopefully be trying to publish the research at some point as well. So making this sort of experiences of those with aniridia more out there to the wider world. And yeah, if you'd like to help me do this, please let me know and I can take your details. So, does anyone have any questions? Or I thought it also might be interesting to get people's thoughts about experiences of those with familial and sporadic forms of aniridia. But yeah, maybe we should go with questions first. Yeah, Chris.
Would you say there's a gap then in research in general as compared to other conditions for aniridia? Would you say that there's a definite research gap?
Yeah, definitely. The review that I mentioned, it's from 2020, and they did a kind of literature search on basically a whole wide range of genetic eye conditions. And then they kind of summarised all of the results from all of that research, and they couldn't find one study to include on aniridia. So most of them were the conditions that I named, like retinitis pigmentosa, Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, Usher syndrome, and albinism as well. But there are a few other ones in there, but they couldn't find any published studies to do with aniridia. So there's definitely a gap there. What was that? Sorry.
I said it's quite a surprise.
Yeah.
So I think, again, my follow-on question there would be, how do we promote studies then? How do you think we sort of next steps in terms of how do we get that started?
Yeah, well, the partnership that the Aniridia Network's been building with Cardiff is really, really useful for that. Like, we'll hear from Emily later about the research that she's done. So it's a great opportunity for me as a MSc student and for the Aniridia Network to promote it. I think in terms of sort of next steps after today, if there's anyone else in the network that you think you'd be interested, or, they don't have to be a member of the Aniridia Network either, there'll be, I believe there'll be sort of an email going out generally to members, and some information on the website as well. Please let people know if you think they'd be interested. Thanks. Yeah, Penny?
Me? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a bit of a family thing going on here.
There is.
No, but just from an observational point of view, sort of working within RNIB services and sort of with friends and family and people that I know myself, there is definitely a difference in how people with parents or relatives with aniridia support each other. To the reactions that sometimes I'll see things on Facebook, on the groups, and the reactions and these kind of the way if parents have a child with aniridia for the first time, the way they react to that is different to how my mum and dad. My dad had aniridia. My children have aniridia, and they've had myself. So we're not kind of phased by it, and yes, it's an unusual condition. But we've learnt strategies to get over some of the difficulties. So there is a difference in that experience. So I think it'd be really interesting to look into that further.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think yeah, it's sort of hard to speculate, isn't it? But I definitely think there'll be sort of some themes around that, and sort of familiarity with, you know, services and clinics, and some of the language and things may well play a role. But
a postcode lottery is also, I think, depends where you live and what your doctors are like, and sort of how familiar they are with your condition too.
Yes, yeah, and navigating all of that, having a heads up on it, you know, may well change that. Yeah, both sort of potentially positively and negatively. But yeah, that's good to get your insight. Thanks, Bernie. Yes, the lady in the middle.
I've actually done your survey. I'm Sylvia Peto, and I did an interview with you, I think around about May time, possibly. But I just wanted to concur with the lady over here that people like myself from families, there's 4 generations and 5 of us in my family, all with aniridia, my mum being the sporadic. So the way that she was brought up, albeit that some of it was because of medical ignorance, if you like, and people didn't know how to deal with it, but her experiences were totally different to our experiences as second, third and fourth generations. So I would like to concur with the lady that was over here.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think it's those sorts of insights that will really help, you know, Aniridia Network to think about what do we need to put in place for maybe people with sporadic aniridia, you know, to help with that kind of familial knowledge and the absence of someone already in the family. But yeah, that's interesting that those 2 themes are already emerging a bit.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
I just wanted to speak to somebody that doesn't have aniridia, but I'm married, my wife's got aniridia, and my 2 children have aniridia. But it's still a shock, you know, because some people don't have it, you know, they don't get it at all, their children get perfect. I say, but I've noticed my children's children seem to have aniridia, but have underlying problems as well. It just seems to be getting worse rather than getting better as the generations goes on. I just wonder if any research and anything into that, because you've got 2, then all of a sudden you've got 9.
Right.
Yes. It's kind of hard to get your head around, you know, why some don't have it and some, you know, but you end up, all the children have it, and I've got eyesight, you know, good eyesight. I can't figure it out. I'm sure some research I could sort of look into and see why is this happening, or is it just me cursed, you know?
Right.
So I don't mean cursed for people that's got aniridia, I don't mean it like that. I mean, how does that happen, the odds, you know?
Yeah. I think those sorts of questions around the probability of this stuff arising in people and things, that's genetic counselling is really the way that the healthcare. So I don't know if you've ever sort of encountered a genetic counsellor. It might they some, like many genetic services, take self-referrals, and their job is essentially to sit down with the family and talk through from a genetic perspective what's happening and what the probabilities are. And for a lot of people it is just really helpful kind of working their way back to understand all of that stuff, because you do end up with families where everyone's got it or where a few people have it. So a genetic counsellor would be kind of good. You know, I'm studying to be one, so I don't want to give you too many kind of conclusive thoughts on that. But yeah, a qualified one would definitely be able to help with that.
It's sort of the topic of Vivian Kitt's talk a bit later. Is sort of around that sort of stuff as to how does the genetics actually influence the symptoms. So yeah, we'll cover some of that. Cool. We need to move on, but please do come and talk to Helen throughout the day, and as I say, sign up to take part in this research. It's really good. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Thanks.